The sun blazed mercilessly over the rocky canyon as Jack Morrison wiped the sweat from his weathered face. His horse, Thunder, stood breathing heavily beneath him, foam gathering at the corners of its mouth. They had been riding hard for 3 days straight, and both man and beast were reaching their limits. Jack had never imagined his life would come to this moment. 3 weeks ago, he was just another cowboy working the Johnson Ranch, breaking horses and mending fences. Now he found himself in the most dangerous territory in all of Arizona, with Apache warriors tracking his every move. The trouble started when Old Man Johnson decided to expand his cattle operation into the sacred lands of the Chiricahua Apache. Jack had warned him against it, knowing the stories of what happened to settlers who disrespected Apache territory. But Johnson was stubborn and greedy, seeing only the rich grasslands and fresh water sources. The first attack came at dawn on a Tuesday morning. Jack was checking the cattle near the eastern boundary when he heard the war cries echoing across the valley. By the time he reached the ranch house, it was already too late. The buildings were ablaze, and Johnson lay dead in his own yard. But what haunted Jack most was what he witnessed in those final moments. 3 young Apache women had been captured during a raid on their camp just days before. Johnson had been holding them prisoner, planning to trade them for safe passage through Apache lands. When the warriors arrived to rescue them, they found their daughters bound and mistreated. The Apache chief, a fierce man named Nal Nish, spoke broken English as he confronted Johnson. "You take our daughters. Now you pay with blood." The chief's eyes burned with righteous anger as he looked at the cowboy who had been part of this terrible situation. Jack tried to explain that he had opposed Johnson's actions, that he had argued against taking the women. But in the heat of battle and grief, his words fell on deaf ears. Nalnish pointed directly at him and declared that he too would face justice for his role in the crime. As the ranch burned around them, Jack managed to escape on Thunder, but not before seeing something that would change everything. The 3 Apache Maidens, now free from their bonds, each wore distinctive symbols around their necks. The eldest wore a silver pendant shaped like a soaring eagle. The second had a turquoise amulet carved into the form of a running wolf. The youngest displayed a small leather pouch decorated with beads arranged in the pattern of a coiled serpent. These were not ordinary ornaments, Jack realized. He had heard stories from old-timers about Apache sacred symbols, tokens of power passed down through generations. The eagle represented vision and courage. The wolf symbolized loyalty and protection. The serpent stood for wisdom and transformation. For 3 days, Jack had been running through the harsh desert landscape, trying to reach the safety of the territorial fort 50 miles away. But the Apache warriors were skilled trackers, and they knew this land better than any white man ever could. Every time Jack thought he had gained some distance, he would spot smoke signals in the distance or catch glimpses of riders on the horizon. Thunder stumbled on loose rocks, and Jack had to dismount to check the horse's legs. As he knelt beside his faithful companion, he heard the sound that made his blood run cold. The rhythmic beating of hooves was growing closer, and there was nowhere left to run. The canyon walls rose steep and imposing on both sides. Behind him lay the path he had traveled, now blocked by pursuing warriors. Ahead, the canyon narrowed into a passage too dangerous to attempt on horseback. Jack was trapped, with no way forward and no way back. He drew his rifle and checked his ammunition. 6 bullets remained, hardly enough to fight off a war party. His water was nearly gone, and Thunder was exhausted. The situation seemed hopeless, but Jack Morrison had not survived 20 years on the frontier by giving up easily. As the sound of approaching horses grew louder, Jack made a desperate decision. He would climb the rocky wall of the canyon and make his stand from higher ground. If he was going to die, he would at least face his fate fighting. Thunder nickered softly, as if sensing his master's resolve. Jack grabbed his saddlebags and rifle, then began the treacherous climb up the rocky slope. Sharp stones cut his hands, and the blazing sun made every movement an ordeal. But he pressed on, driven by the slim hope that elevation might give him some advantage. When he reached a narrow ledge about 30 feet above the canyon floor, Jack turned to look back. The Apache war party had arrived, their painted horses dancing nervously at the bottom of the cliff. There were 8 warriors in total, their faces painted for battle, feathers adorning their long black hair. But it was the 3 figures at the back of the group that caught Jack's attention. The Apache Maidens had returned with their rescuers, still wearing their sacred symbols. Even from this distance, Jack could see the glint of silver, the blue of turquoise, and the intricate beadwork of the serpent design. Chief Nalnish raised his voice, the words echoing off the canyon walls. "Cowboy, you cannot run forever. Come down and face justice for your crimes." Jack cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted back, "I never hurt your daughters. I tried to stop Johnson from taking them." "You lie," another warrior called out. "You were there when they suffered." The truth was complicated, and Jack knew that explanations would not save him now. These men had every right to seek vengeance for what had been done to their people. The capture and mistreatment of the 3 maidens was an unforgivable offense in Apache culture. As the sun began to set, painting the canyon walls in shades of orange and red, Jack realized that this standoff could not last forever. His water was almost gone, and the Apache could simply wait for him to weaken and collapse. They had all the time in the world. But as darkness approached, something unexpected happened. The eldest maiden, the one wearing the eagle symbol, separated herself from the group and began climbing the rocky slope toward Jack's position. The warriors called out to her, clearly concerned for her safety, but she continued her ascent with determination. Jack kept his rifle ready but did not aim it at the approaching figure. Something in her movements suggested she was not coming to attack him. When she reached a position close enough to speak without shouting, she stopped and looked directly into his eyes. Her name was Ayana, which meant eternal blossom in the Apache language. Despite everything she had endured at the hands of white men, there was no hatred in her gaze. Instead, Jack saw something that surprised him: curiosity, and perhaps even compassion. "You speak truth about trying to stop the bad man?" she asked in careful English. Jack nodded emphatically. "I told Johnson many times that taking you and your sisters was wrong. I said the Apache would come for revenge, but he would not listen to me." Ayana studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to read the truth in his expression. "My father says all white men lie, but your eyes tell different story." "I may die here today," Jack replied, "but I will not die with lies on my lips. I swear by everything I hold sacred that I opposed what Johnson did to you." The young woman touched the eagle pendant at her throat, and Jack noticed that it seemed to catch and reflect the last rays of sunlight in an almost mystical way. She closed her eyes for a moment, as if listening to some inner voice. When she opened them again, there was a new resolve in her expression. "The eagle shows me visions sometimes. It tells me when people speak truth or lies. Your words carry no darkness." Below them, the other warriors were growing restless. Chief Nalnish called up to his daughter, demanding that she return to safety. But Ayana raised her hand, signaling that she needed more time. "There may be a way to save your life," she said to Jack, "but it would require great courage, and you would have to trust in powers you do not understand." Jack's heart leaped at the possibility of survival, but he remained cautious. "What kind of way?" Ayana pointed to her eagle pendant, then gestured toward her 2 sisters below, who still wore their wolf and serpent symbols. "These are not mere decorations. They are sacred tokens, passed down from our grandmother's grandmother. Together they hold old magic." Magic? Jack had heard tales of Apache spiritual practices, but he had always assumed they were just superstitions. "Your people call it magic. We call it connection to the spirit world. The three symbols together can create protection, but only if the bearer proves worthy through trial. Jack felt a chill run down his spine despite the desert heat. What kind of trial? You would have to come with us willingly. Submit to our judgment and face 3 tests, 1 for each symbol. If you survive all 3 and prove your spirit is pure, the symbols will grant you safe passage through Apache lands forever. The offer seemed impossible to believe. And if I fail these tests? Ayana's expression grew somber. Then you die, but with honor, instead of as a fugitive. Jack looked down at the warriors below, then at the vast desert stretching endlessly in all directions. His chances of escape were essentially 0, but the prospect of facing unknown spiritual trials seemed almost as terrifying as certain death. "Why would you offer this to me?" he asked. "After what your people have suffered?" "Because the eagle spirit whispers that you may be important to our future. There are dark times coming for both our peoples. The symbols may have brought us together for a reason we do not yet understand." As if to emphasize her words, a real eagle suddenly appeared overhead, circling the canyon in lazy spirals. Its cry echoed off the rocks, seeming to carry some kind of message that only Ayana could interpret. Jack watched the magnificent bird and felt something stir in his chest. Perhaps it was just desperation, or maybe something deeper. Either way, he knew that conventional escape was impossible. If there was any chance of survival, it lay in trusting this Apache maiden and her mystical symbols. "If I agree," he said slowly, "what guarantee do I have that this is not just another way to kill me?" Ayana touched her pendant again, and this time Jack could swear he saw it pulse with its own inner light. The sacred symbols cannot be used for deception. "If we invoke their power, we are bound by their spiritual laws. To break such an oath would bring terrible consequences upon our entire tribe." The weight of the moment settled over Jack like a heavy blanket. Below, the Apache warriors waited with growing impatience. Above, the eagle continued its circles, as if presiding over some cosmic decision. And before him sat a young woman offering him a chance that defied all logic and reason. Thunder whinnied from somewhere below, reminding Jack of his loyal companion. "What about my horse?" "If you prove worthy, he will be returned to you. The Apache respect the bond between man and horse." Jack took a deep breath and made his choice. "Then I accept your offer. I will come with you and face whatever trials await." Ayana smiled for the first time since he had seen her, and the expression transformed her entire face. "Then we begin a journey that may change both our worlds." Jack Morrison descended the rocky slope, with his hands raised in surrender, his rifle left behind on the ledge as a gesture of good faith. The Apache warriors watched his every move with suspicious eyes, their weapons ready despite Ayana's intervention. Chief Nalnish spoke rapidly in the Apache language when his daughter reached the bottom of the canyon. Jack could not understand the words, but the tone was clearly one of concern and disapproval. Ayana responded with equal intensity, gesturing toward Jack and touching her eagle pendant repeatedly. The debate continued for several minutes while Jack stood motionless, acutely aware that his life hung in the balance of this family discussion. The other 2 maidens, Ayana's sisters, joined the conversation. The one wearing the wolf symbol appeared to support Ayana's position, while the youngest, with the serpent design, seemed more uncertain. Finally, Chief Nalnish raised his hand for silence. He approached Jack slowly, his weathered face a mask of controlled anger and grief. When he spoke, his English was more fluent than Jack had expected. "My daughter believes the spirits have guided you to us for a purpose. Against my better judgment, I will honor her vision." The chief's eyes narrowed dangerously. "But know this, white man. If you prove false, if this is some trick to escape justice, you will die more slowly than you can imagine." Jack met the chief's gaze steadily. "I understand and I accept the terms. Then we begin immediately. The trials must be completed before the moon reaches its peak tomorrow night, or the opportunity is lost forever. The war party mounted their horses and began the journey deeper into Apache territory. Jack rode Thunder, but two warriors flanked him at all times. The landscape grew increasingly rugged as they traveled through hidden passages and ancient trails known only to the Apache. As they rode, Ayanna fell back to explain what lay ahead. The first trial belongs to my sister Itzel, keeper of the wolf symbol. You must prove your loyalty and capacity for protection. The wolf spirit demands that you put others before yourself, even at great personal risk. Jack glanced at the second maiden, who rode with natural grace despite her youth. Her wolf amulet seemed to pulse with a blue-green light as the shadows lengthened. What exactly will I have to do? That will be revealed when the time comes. But I warn you, the trials are not games. They draw upon real spiritual forces, and the dangers you face will be genuine. They reached the Apache camp as full darkness fell. It was larger than Jack had expected, with dozens of wiki-ups arranged in careful patterns. Cooking fires cast dancing shadows on the faces of men, women, and children who emerged to watch the strange procession. Jack had never been inside an Apache settlement before, and he was struck by how organized and civilized it appeared. These were not the savage raiders that white settlers described in their fearful stories. These were people with families, traditions, and a complex society. An elderly woman approached the group, her white hair braided with colorful beads and feathers. She spoke with Chief Nalnish in low, urgent tones, occasionally glancing at Jack with eyes that seemed to see far more than they should. "That is Nayeli, our medicine woman," Ayanna explained. "She will oversee the trials to ensure they are conducted properly." Nayeli hobbled over to Jack and began circling him slowly, chanting in a language so old it sounded like wind through ancient stones. She stopped directly in front of him and placed one gnarled hand on his chest, over his heart. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Jack felt as if the old woman was reading his very soul. Her touch was hot as a brand, yet somehow comforting. When she finally stepped back, she nodded approvingly and spoke a single word that Ayanna translated. "She says your spirit is troubled but not corrupted. The trials may cleanse you, if you survive them." Jack was given a place to sleep near the edge of the camp, with guards posted nearby. As he lay on a blanket under the vast canopy of desert stars, he wondered what he had gotten himself into. The rational part of his mind insisted that spiritual trials and magical symbols were nonsense, but something deeper, some instinct honed by years of frontier life, told him he was about to experience things beyond his understanding. Dawn came with the sound of drums and chanting. Jack was awakened by Itzel, the keeper of the wolf symbol, who gestured for him to follow her. Unlike her sister Ayanna, Itzel spoke no English, but her intentions were clear enough. They walked to a clearing at the edge of the camp where a crowd had gathered. In the center of the space sat a wiki-up that had seen better days, its covering torn and framework sagging. Smoke poured from a hole in the roof, and the acrid smell of burning green wood filled the air. Nayeli appeared beside Jack and began speaking through Ayanna, who served as translator. "The first trial tests your willingness to risk everything to protect others. Inside the burning lodge, 3 children are trapped by flames and smoke. You must enter and bring them out safely." Jack stared at the blazing structure in disbelief. "There are actually children in there?" "Yes," Ayanna confirmed grimly. "Volunteers from the tribe. If you fail to rescue them, they will die. If you succeed, you pass the first trial." The moral weight of the situation hit Jack like a physical blow. This was not some symbolic test or spiritual metaphor. Real lives hung in the balance, and his actions would determine whether innocent children lived or died. Without hesitation, Jack stripped off his shirt and soaked it in a nearby water pot. He wrapped the wet fabric around his head and shoulders, then plunged into the smoke-filled lodge. The heat was overwhelming, and the smoke burned his eyes and lungs immediately. Visibility was nearly zero, forcing him to navigate by touch alone. He dropped to his hands and knees where the air was slightly clearer and began searching systematically. His groping hands found the first child huddled against the far wall, a boy of perhaps 8 years old who was barely conscious from smoke inhalation. Jack grabbed the child and crawled toward where he remembered the entrance being, guided only by the slightly cooler air flowing from that direction. Emerging into daylight with the first child drew approving murmurs from the watching crowd. Jack handed the boy to waiting hands and immediately plunged back into the inferno. The second rescue was harder because the fire had spread and the smoke had thickened. Jack's lungs felt like they were full of molten metal, and his skin was beginning to blister from the intense heat. But he pressed on, driven by the knowledge that 2 more children depended on him. He found the second child, a girl slightly older than the first, trapped beneath a fallen roof support. The wood was burning but not yet fully engulfed. Jack used his belt knife to cut away enough of the covering to create a gap, then pulled the girl free and carried her to safety. By now, his strength was nearly depleted. The wet shirt had dried and begun to smolder. His vision was blurred by smoke and heat, and every breath felt like swallowing fire. But 1 child remained inside. The third rescue nearly killed him. The entire structure was now fully ablaze, and sections of the framework were beginning to collapse. Jack crawled through a maze of fire and falling debris, following the sound of terrified whimpering. He found the last child, a girl no more than 5 years old, trapped in a corner where the flames had not yet reached but the smoke was thickest. She was unconscious and barely breathing. Jack wrapped her in what remained of his shirt and began the agonizing crawl back to the entrance. A burning beam crashed down across his path, blocking the way out. With the last of his strength, Jack lifted the timber and rolled under it, feeling the flames sear his back as he passed. He emerged from the lodge just as the entire structure collapsed behind him. The watching Apache erupted in cheers and war cries. Children and adults alike rushed forward to help Jack and check on the rescued victims. All 3 children were alive, though suffering from smoke inhalation. More importantly, Jack had proven himself worthy of the wolf spirit's protection. Itzel approached him as the medicine woman tended to his burns. The young Apache maiden touched her wolf amulet and spoke in her native language. Ayanna translated with obvious pride in her voice. She says the wolf recognizes your courage and selflessness. You have passed the first trial. Jack could barely speak through his smoke-damaged throat, but he managed to rasp out a question. How many more? 2, Ayanna replied. But first, you must recover your strength. The trials grow more difficult with each test. Jack spent the next day being nursed back to health by the Apache women. They treated his burns with herbal poultices that seemed to heal with miraculous speed. More importantly, they treated him with newfound respect. Word of his actions in the burning lodge had spread throughout the camp, and many who had viewed him with suspicion now regarded him as a potential ally. Chief Nalnish visited him that evening as he rested outside his assigned wiki-up. The Apache leader's manner had changed noticeably since the trial began. You surprise me, Cowboy, the chief admitted. I expected you to refuse the first trial or to fail it completely. Instead, you risked your life for Apache children you did not even know. I couldn't let them die, Jack replied simply. Not for any test or trial. That is exactly why you passed, Nalnish said with something approaching a smile. The wolf spirit values those who protect others without thought of personal gain. As night fell on the second day, drums began beating again. This time it was Xitlali, the youngest maiden and keeper of the serpent symbol, who came to collect Jack. Her trial would test his wisdom and ability to see truth through deception. The second trial took place in a sacred cave deep in the mountains above the camp. By torchlight, Jack could see ancient paintings covering the walls, depicting scenes of Apache history and spiritual beliefs. In the center of the cave, a natural pool of water reflected the dancing flames. Nayeli had painted Jack's face with ceremonial symbols that felt warm against his skin. As the old medicine woman chanted, the serpent amulet around Citlali's neck began to glow with an eerie green light. The serpent trial is different from the wolf trial, Ayanna explained as they prepared. Instead of physical courage, it tests mental and spiritual strength. You will be shown visions, some true and some false. You must use wisdom to distinguish between reality and illusion. Jack knelt beside the pool as instructed and gazed into its depths. At first, he saw only his own reflection distorted by the rippling water. But as the chanting grew more intense and the serpent amulet's glow brightened, the surface began to show him impossible things. He saw himself as a child on his family's farm in Kansas, watching his father teach him to shoot. But in this vision, his father's face kept changing. Sometimes appearing as Chief Nalnish, sometimes as Old Man Johnson, and sometimes as a face he didn't recognize at all. The visions shifted and multiplied. Jack saw the Apache camp under attack by cavalry soldiers, with bodies littering the ground and wickiups burning. He saw himself leading the attack, dressed in an army uniform he had never worn. The image was so vivid and compelling that he almost believed it was a true prophecy. But as the serpent wisdom filled his mind, Jack began to understand the nature of the test. These visions were designed to confuse and mislead him. Some contained grains of truth, while others were complete fabrications meant to play upon his fears and prejudices. He saw a vision of Ayanna being captured by white settlers who looked exactly like him. In this false memory, she was calling his name and begging him to save her. The emotional pull was almost overwhelming, but Jack recognized it as an attempt to manipulate his feelings. Another vision showed him finding a massive gold strike in Apache territory, becoming wealthy beyond his dreams. The serpent whispered that all he had to do was lead a mining company to the sacred sites, betraying the trust of his new Apache friends for personal gain. Each vision tested a different aspect of his character. Some appealed to greed, others to fear, and still others to pride or revenge. But as the trial progressed, Jack began to see the pattern. The false visions always involved betraying others for personal benefit, while the true visions showed consequences for his choices. In one particularly powerful true vision, he saw a future where Apache and white settlers lived in peace, working together to build a better life for both peoples. The image was so beautiful and hopeful that it brought tears to his eyes. The final vision was the most challenging of all. It showed Jack's own death, not in this cave or in Apache territory, but many years in the future as an old man surrounded by friends from both cultures. In this true prophecy, he died knowing that he had helped bridge the gap between two worlds. When the visions finally faded and the pool returned to normal, Jack found himself gasping for breath. The experience had felt more real than reality itself, and sorting truth from deception had required every ounce of mental strength he possessed. Citlali touched her serpent amulet and spoke to her sister. Ayanna's translation brought relief flooding through Jack's exhausted mind. She says you have shown true wisdom. The serpent recognizes your ability to see through deception and choose the path of truth. You have passed the second trial. But even as Jack celebrated this victory, he knew the most difficult challenge still lay ahead. 2 trials down, 1 to go. And according to everything he had heard, the final trial would test not just his courage or wisdom, but his very soul. The third day dawned with an ominous red sky that stretched across the entire horizon. Jack had slept poorly, haunted by fragments of the serpent visions that continued to flicker through his dreams. As he emerged from his wickiup, he noticed that the entire Apache camp seemed subdued, as if everyone understood that this final trial would determine not just his fate, but perhaps the destiny of both their peoples. Ayanna came to him as the sun climbed higher, her eagle pendant catching the morning light. Her expression was more serious than he had ever seen it, and there was a weight in her dark eyes that spoke of deep concern. "Today I will test you myself," she said quietly. "The eagle trial is the most dangerous of all three, because it requires you to confront not just external challenges, but the deepest truths about yourself." Jack had been dreading this moment since the trials began. The first two tests had been difficult enough, but there had been clear objectives to accomplish: save the children, distinguish truth from lies. But the eagle trial sounded far more mysterious and personal. "What exactly does the eagle spirit demand of me?" he asked. "Vision," Ayanna replied. "The eagle sees all things from great height. It understands connections and purposes that ground-dwelling creatures cannot perceive. You must prove that you can see beyond your own immediate needs and understand your place in the larger pattern of life." They walked together toward a steep mesa that rose like a natural tower from the desert floor. The climbing path was treacherous, winding between loose rocks and narrow ledges that offered terrifying drops for those who lost their footing. Jack noticed that they were accompanied not by warriors this time, but by Nayeli, the medicine woman, and several other elderly Apache whose faces bore the weathered wisdom of many years. At the top of the mesa, Jack found himself standing on a flat expanse of rock that seemed to touch the sky itself. The view in every direction was breathtaking, showing the vast expanse of Apache territory stretching to distant mountains. But what caught his attention immediately was the structure that dominated the center of the plateau. Ancient stones had been arranged in a perfect circle, with passages radiating outward like the spokes of a wheel. Each passage was carved with symbols that seemed to shift and dance when viewed directly. In the very center of the stone circle stood a tall pillar of black rock that reflected the sky like polished obsidian. "This is the Vision Circle," Ayanna explained. "It was built by my people's ancestors hundreds of years ago when the eagle spirit first came to guide us. Here, the barrier between the physical world and the spirit realm grows thin." Nayeli began preparations for the ceremony, burning sacred herbs and painting new symbols on Jack's face and arms. As the smoke from her fire began to rise, Jack felt a strange tingling sensation, as if the very air around him was becoming charged with unseen energy. "What happens during this trial?" Jack asked, though part of him dreaded the answer. "You will enter the vision circle and touch the black pillar," Ayanna said. "When you do, the eagle spirit will show you visions of past, present, and future. But unlike the serpent visions, these will not be tests of your ability to distinguish truth from falsehood. These will be true visions, but they will show you truths that may be difficult to accept." "And if I cannot accept them?" Ayanna's expression grew grave. "Then you will be trapped in the spirit realm forever, neither alive nor dead. That is why this trial is so dangerous. It requires not just courage, but the strength to face whatever truths the eagle reveals, no matter how painful they might be." As the sun reached its peak, Nayeli indicated that the time had come. Jack stepped forward into the stone circle, immediately feeling the hair on his arms stand up as if lightning were about to strike. The black pillar seemed to pulse with its own inner rhythm, calling him forward. He walked slowly toward the center, aware that with each step, the world around him was becoming less solid and more dreamlike. The sounds of wind and birds faded until all he could hear was his own heartbeat and the whisper of ancient voices speaking in languages he did not recognize. When his hand finally touched the obsidian surface of the pillar, reality exploded into a kaleidoscope of visions that overwhelmed all his senses. First, he saw the deep past of this land. Apache ancestors living in harmony with the desert, their lives intertwined with the natural world in ways that white settlers could barely imagine. He saw great chiefs and medicine women, warriors and storytellers, all connected by threads of tradition and spiritual understanding. Then the visions shifted to show the coming of the Spanish conquistadors, followed by Mexican settlers, and finally, American pioneers. Jack watched in horror as disease and warfare devastated the native populations. He saw treaties made and broken, sacred lands seized and desecrated, children taken from their families and forced to abandon their heritage. But the eagle showed him both sides of the story. He saw white families struggling to survive in a harsh land, driven by desperation and dreams of a better life. He saw settlers who tried to live peacefully with their Apache neighbors, and Apache leaders who sought accommodation rather than endless warfare. The visions revealed the truth that both sides had committed atrocities, but they also showed that hatred and conflict were not inevitable. There were paths toward understanding and cooperation that had been overlooked or abandoned in favor of fear and prejudice. As the visions continued, Jack began to understand his own role in this larger story. He saw himself not as an individual cowboy trying to survive, but as a bridge between two worlds that desperately needed to find common ground. The eagle spirit showed him a possible future where Apache and white communities worked together, sharing knowledge and resources while respecting each other's traditions. In this vision, children from both cultures learned from each other, creating a new kind of society that was stronger than either could be alone. But the spirit also showed him darker possibilities. He saw escalating warfare that would destroy both peoples, leaving only empty lands and bitter memories. He saw the complete destruction of Apache culture, with the sacred knowledge of centuries lost forever. The choice, the eagle made clear, would be largely up to him and others like him who stood at the crossroads between the two worlds. Then the visions became intensely personal. Jack saw his own future spreading out like branches of a tree, each decision creating new possibilities or closing off others. He saw himself returning to white society and trying to convince others of what he had learned, facing ridicule and suspicion from those who preferred simple hatred to complex truth. He saw himself staying with the Apache and becoming a permanent bridge between the cultures, helping to negotiate treaties and resolve conflicts. In this future, he married Ayanna and raised children who embodied the best of both worlds. But he also saw futures where he failed in his mission, where fear and prejudice proved stronger than wisdom and compassion. In these darker visions, he became either a traitor to his own people or a false friend to the Apache, serving neither cause well. The most challenging vision came last. The eagle spirit showed him the moment of his own death, not as the serpent had done with a distant glimpse, but in vivid, immediate detail. He saw himself as an old man, lying peacefully in a simple bed surrounded by people he had helped bring together. Apache and white faces mingled around him, all mourning the loss of a man who had dedicated his life to building bridges. In that final vision, Jack understood that the true test was not whether he could face death with courage, but whether he could face life with purpose. The eagle was asking him to choose not just survival, but a mission that would define the rest of his existence. When the visions finally ended, Jack found himself kneeling beside the black pillar, tears streaming down his face. The weight of what he had seen was almost crushing, but he also felt a sense of clarity and purpose, unlike anything he had ever experienced. Ayanna was beside him immediately, her own eyes bright with emotion. "You have seen the eagle's truth," she said softly. "Do you accept the responsibility it has shown you?" Jack stood slowly, his legs shaking from the spiritual ordeal, but his voice was steady as he replied, "I accept it all. The mission, the responsibility, and whatever sacrifices it requires." Chief Nalnish had climbed to the mesa during the vision ceremony, and now he approached with an expression of profound respect. The eagle has chosen you as a bridge between our peoples. This is a greater honor than you may realize. It's also a greater burden, Jack replied. But I understand now why all of this happened. Why Johnson's greed led to your daughters being captured. Why I was there to witness it. Why I ended up fleeing into your territory. The spirits were guiding events to bring us to this moment. Nayeli hobbled forward and spoke in rapid Apache. Ayanna translated with obvious excitement. She says the three symbols are now united in their approval of you. Together they will provide protection and guidance as you undertake your mission. But more than that, they mark you as a sacred messenger between the worlds. The old medicine woman reached into her pouch and withdrew a small leather cord strung with 3 miniature replicas of the sacred symbols. The tiny eagle, wolf, and serpent seemed to glow with their own inner light as she placed the cord around Jack's neck. This will identify you to any Apache as one who carries our trust, Ayanna explained, and it will remind you of the visions you have seen whenever you face difficult choices. As they prepared to descend from the mesa, Jack realized that his old life as a simple cowboy was over forever. He was now something new, something that had no name in either culture. He was a bridge between worlds, a keeper of visions, a guardian of possibilities. The journey back to the Apache camp was filled with celebration. Word of Jack's successful completion of the trials had spread, and the entire tribe turned out to welcome their new ally. But Jack barely noticed the festivities. His mind was still processing the incredible visions and the enormous responsibility they represented. That evening, as the celebration continued around them, Jack and Ayanna sat together outside the camp, looking up at the star-filled sky. The 3 sacred symbols around his neck seemed to pulse gently with each heartbeat. "What happens now?" Jack asked. "Now the real work begins," Ayanna replied. "Tomorrow my father will send messengers to other Apache bands, telling them of what has occurred here, and you must begin your mission to the white settlements, trying to convince your people that cooperation is possible." "Many of them won't listen," Jack said. "They'll think I've gone native or been brainwashed." "The eagle showed you that truth," Ayanna agreed. "But it also showed you that some will listen, and that those few may be enough to change everything." Jack touched the sacred symbols at his throat, feeling their warmth against his skin. "I saw you in the visions. We were together." Ayanna smiled, the first truly happy expression he had seen on her face since this all began. "The eagle sees many possibilities. Some require great courage to pursue. After everything we've been through, I think I've learned something about courage," Jack replied. As if summoned by their words, a real eagle appeared overhead, circling slowly in the starlight. Its cry echoed across the desert, sounding like both a blessing and a challenge. Jack Morrison knew that tomorrow would bring the beginning of the most important work of his life. He would ride out from this Apache camp not as a fugitive or an enemy, but as a messenger carrying hope for a better future. The sacred symbols had become his last hope for survival, but they had given him something far more valuable, a purpose worth living for. The 3 Apache Maidens had saved more than just his life. They had saved 2 cultures from a future of endless hatred and warfare, and now it was up to him to make sure their sacrifice would not be in vain. As the eagle finally disappeared into the starlit sky, Jack felt the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders. But for the first time since this incredible journey began, it felt like a burden he was ready to carry.